This is the Made for Success podcast, and this is Chris Widener, speaker and author of over 15 books, including the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Angel Inside. The Made for Success podcast will help you turn your potential into performance, succeed in every area of your life, and achieve your dreams. And now, enjoy the show.
Our guest today is John Connors. John is a partner at Ignition Partners, LLC, investing principally in enterprise and business software. Prior to joining Ignition, John spent 16 years with Microsoft in various strategic roles, including Senior Vice President of Finance and Administration and Chief Financial Officer from January 2000 to April 2005. In this role, John was responsible for managing the global finance function as well as corporate services, procurement, real estate, and the company's global operations and technology group. John is also a member of the board of directors of Nike, Jobster, and Certus corporations. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. I've heard so many good things about you. So let's walk through your process through Microsoft, because you started out, you didn't start out as the CFO. You started out, you came in entry level, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
kind of an entry level management job.
Yeah. And what did you do first? I know you held a series of events, and I guess what I'd like to have you help us shape over the next little bit of time talking together is the evolution of a person who ends up becoming very successful in a very successful company, because sort of transferable principles that people who are watching can say, my career can grow that way.
Yeah, and I started out in the job title was retail accounting manager, which it would be equivalent in a lot of companies at the time to an assistant controller for the U.S. business. And in particular, I was responsible for the manufacturing operations, the finance for manufacturing operations and marketing. That was terrific in terms of learning the company at the time, because if you really study a manufacturing operation, you learn what gets built, you learn how is it priced, and you learn how is it distributed. And in any business, you need to learn what goes into that BOM or the product that's built, how's it priced, how is it discounted, and how does it get distributed to the channel. And that's applicable anywhere. It was very valuable to do that at Microsoft in my first job. Secondly, in working in marketing, at the time, Microsoft was hiring a lot of very talented product marketing people. And I got to work with those folks on their marketing plans, their marketing spend, their marketing campaigns. And it was guys like Pete Higgins, who went on to run Office, Jeff Rakes, who's now still at Microsoft. Robbie Bach was a young guy. He had started 6 months just before he runs the Xbox and home and entertainment business. And it was really terrific to learn how do these products get built, priced, and distributed? And then secondly, how do they create demand for the products, and how do they create a PR strategy and a communication strategy? That gave me a great understanding of sort of how does Microsoft work outside of the product development and R&D side. Shortly, about 18 months after starting, I got approached about going into a staff position in what was the system software group. And at the time, Steve Ballmer ran the system software group. It included DOS, it included languages, it included the hardware.
So Windows was still yet to be, correct?
Well, there was a project going on with IBM called OS2, and there was this kind of small project called Windows. And so I joined before the launch of Windows 3.0 in this staff position. And I basically did the things that Steve needed to be done as he running the systems division. Worked on budgeting things, worked on organizational things, worked on logistic things, worked on licensing things. And that was a great introduction to me on how the R&D processes at Microsoft work. And I then became really good friends with a number of the R&D people, several of whom are now partners with me at Ignition. One of the jobs I had, for example, was to create an orientation program for new executives as they joined Microsoft. One of them was a guy named Brad Silverberg, and he was hired to run the Windows development. It was my job to get him oriented when he came on board. He then became a partner at Ignition. He and I are partners today, 15, 20 years after the fact, which was really a fun thing. Excuse me. From there, Steve Ballmer moved over in late 91 to run the sales and marketing organization. I moved with him as his chief of staff, if you will. And that's when I really began to get involved in the sales processes of the company. And there were a couple things we had to do. The first was build a common measurement system for all the subsidiaries around the world. So how were we going to hold all of the subsidiaries accountable in the same way? What were the sales tools we were going to use? What were the gross margin tools? What were the quota tools? And prior to that, it was very region specific, and you couldn't measure things commonly around the world. Learned from that, and Steve is an extraordinarily good guy at measurement. Getting people to clearly understand how you as a manager are going to measure them is very, very important. And if you have a global organization, that's even doubly important.
Right.
We also worked on figuring out how do we get companies to be able to license our software more easily. Prior to Steve becoming the head of sales, there was no way to license to one big corporation the right to use the software anywhere in the world. There was no way to give a specific division the right to enter into a contract on behalf of the whole company. So we incubated the licensing programs. We also had to work on new channel strategies for, as we develop additional new products, particularly server products versus desktop, that requires a different distribution channel. How do you really study that distribution channel? How do you figure out whether you hire your own vertically integrated consultants? Do you use third parties, et cetera? We worked a lot on the research of the channel strategy for the server products, and I learned a great deal the value of doing really rigorous analytic research before you make a big investment. But then once you start to make the investment, by golly, you got to push and you got to go, because once the decision's done, it's done, and you got to make it succeed.
And isn't this all similar to, I mean, there's people watching who are saying, hey, I've got 2 family-owned convenience stores, but it's the exact same thing.
Oh, it's
just much larger scale, right?
There's no difference whatsoever. The only thing that's probably even more, a bit different with a smaller family-owned business or an early-stage company versus, at that time, Microsoft was established and had a number of really robust financial generators, Windows and Office. Microsoft could make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
A lot of small companies or early stage companies, you can't make fatal mistakes, or you have to adjust very fast. And so I think the larger you get, you have the luxury of making more mistakes and trying things for a longer period of time. And so I think one of the magic things about commerce in the United States and entrepreneurs is they constantly figure out how to adjust to succeed.
Yeah.
And that rigor of doing an analysis well, and then making a decision, and then working incredibly hard to make that decision successful was a great lesson. From there, I moved to Europe to work for the President of Europe in Paris.
What year is this?
That's 1993, January of 93.
Okay, so before you tell me about moving to Europe, let me ask you, at this point, was anybody looking around saying, I think we're really on to something here? I mean, this is, had you realized that something special was taking place, that
You know, probably, your opportunities are good.
Yeah.
And when several key people in the company keep tapping you on the shoulder to do jobs, that's goodness.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
But at the time, Microsoft had a largely unstructured people development, leadership development program. And it worked really well. It was find great people and put them in big jobs.
was this sort of organic at that point, though?
You know, because the place was growing 60% a year. And, you know, it was just hyper growth.
Speaking of bull riding, I mean,
Yeah,
that must have felt a lot like it, huh?
It was that. So I completed that job with Steve in the Worldwide Strategy Group, then moved to Europe in January of 93 for what was supposed to be a 2-year assignment, working for the President of Europe, a guy named Bernard Vernier in Paris. And there were really 2 jobs. One was to help him run Africa, Europe, the Middle East. And that's a complicated job. I think at the time there were 43 different languages spoken in X number of countries. And he was an extraordinarily talented guy. But just make the thing work and run. And secondly, we were in the process of closing all of our order processing and warehouses in individual countries around the European region and moving it to Dublin, Ireland. So I worked on that project. That 2 years got truncated to 10 and a half, 11 months, because the then CFO of Microsoft, a guy named Frank Gaudet, died of cancer, and Mike Brown was moving up to be CFO, and I was asked to come back to work in the finance group. There was some real pressing projects and issues, and that's probably the first big management job I ever had in terms of large number of people. There was about 190 people in the group I was managing, and it was the first time I ever had to manage managers. Prior to that, I'd managed, the largest group was probably 35 people, and going from 35 is the largest you've ever managed to a couple hundred is a big switch.
Did you feel any sort of fear, or was it daunting at all?
Absolutely. Used to.
See, that's the other thing. I think people look at people like yourself and they go, "Oh man, I bet he's just been a hard charger and never been afraid of anything."
Heck no.
And everybody goes through it though, don't they?
Oh, I think if anybody tells you they don't have a lot of waking up in the middle of the nights, they're not being true.
Yeah.
It was incredibly stressful the first 4, 5, 6 months until you got an operating rhythm in place of how to operate. And secondly, you had all the right leaders in the right jobs. One of the things this was also the first job where I had to do a lot of management work in either upgrading the talent or hiring talent from outside.
Now, when you say upgrading, what do you mean? Was it you realized that some people had gone as far as they could go?
Well, some people might have gone as far as they could go, or some people didn't have clear objectives, or some people weren't achieving as much as they could achieve. And so getting everybody to set stretch objectives and elevate their game, and for those that you didn't think could elevate their game, honestly sit down with them and tell them, you know what, this is not the right job for you. We're looking for X, Y, Z, and you want to do A, B, C. And they weren't people that you wanted out of the company necessarily, but they weren't the right people for that job.
They're out of position.
Out of position. I learned in that role how to manage managers, how to really elevate people to improve performance, and how to have the conversation with someone that they're out of position and that we have to have this other person come in to take their spot.
What did you have to learn yourself to become a better leader? I mean, what were the things where you said, okay, I better figure this out for me? What areas of your life did you have to formulate to become the person who could lead those people?
There were several things. First, you have to set a much broader set of goals that cover the entire organization and then are then relevant to each of the groups that you're managing. And so setting broad goals that the whole organization could say, yep, I get it, it's relevant to me, and it has something to do with what I'm trying to achieve. The second key thing is to delegate, and that is get the right leaders in their spots and let them do their jobs as management, and don't take their jobs away from them by diving in to their groups. And there's sometimes when you have to be involved, but being very, very clear that you've delegated this to them and they understand that it's their job to execute, it's not your job. So learning to delegate was really important. The third key thing was having a much different communication style and much different communication practices, because you all of a sudden have to communicate in a way that allows 200 people to know where the group's going and what it needs to do, but not take away the power that the management you've hired needs to have to do their job. And so, things like how do you ensure that the management review process is done very, very well so that the management understands what the goals are, but the employees do as well? How do you get to know the talent in the group that no longer works directly for you, but you need to know how they are so that you can make the talent that is in the group part of a broader talent strategy? And then I think the third thing is you have to be great at resolving the conflicts that your group has with other groups in a positive way.
Let's take a 20-second break to thank our sponsor, Made for Success Publishing. For listeners of this show, visit madeforsuccess.com/podcast and enjoy half off of the world's most popular personal development audiobooks. Use coupon code SUCCESS at checkout for a 50% savings. Now, back to the Made for Success podcast show.
Even within this, you mean even within the same company, two groups might have conflict?
They're regularly. And I think early in my career, I was good at resolving conflict with other groups, mostly by winning and mostly by taking the hill. And I learned over time that that's not a great long-term way to work in a company or in life. It's much better to figure out how to cooperatively solve the problem and have a win-win situation while still solving the problem.
Yeah. So from that point then, you moved to
Europe. I was in Europe for just 10 and a half months. I came back to this job that I mentioned, worldwide financial operations as a general manager. I had that job for about 7 months, and it got merged then with the corporate controller organization, and I became corporate controller in April of '94. And that was a really interesting time to be corporate controller for Microsoft, because basically the company had grown incredibly fast, and the business processes and business systems and management team worldwide wasn't where it needed to be relative to the growth that had happened and the growth that was coming. So we had a very large-scale effort in a short amount of time to scale up the worldwide talent in the controller organization and create controllers in each business unit as well as each geography. We had a very large-scale project to move all of these information systems around the world that were put up in France, in Germany, in Japan, in Brazil. Each country had their own separate financial system from an IT perspective. We built a new consolidated system in Redmond and shut down all the systems in the world. So from that point forward, all the transactions and all the financial information came from Redmond versus the local country. And then thirdly, we had a very, very big push to build the best financial analytics system in the world for sales, for online payments, for online information. And we made really, really great progress in a 2-year period doing all those things. During that time, I learned a couple key things. First, as you move into a corporate officer role and even a bigger organization, and by this time that group was probably 550 people, you are almost completely dependent for success on the quality of the leaders underneath you. And if you have great leaders underneath you and they believe in you, you're going to look good. If you do not have good leaders underneath you, you will get blamed. So there's no way that the world will ever work other than that. You have great leaders, you'll look good. You don't have great leaders, you won't succeed, and anything that happens in that group, it's yours to wear.
Cardinal rule, pick good leaders.
Bottom line, pick, and I learned in that job, Chris, more than anything, you have to have people below you who you think are better than you. And they, though, have to think you bring something to them that is really value add. Otherwise, you won't be able to recruit them and keep them in your group. And so there were two people in particular. One was an assistant controller, a guy named Scott Boggs, and secondly was a head of our financial systems, Bob Lunn. And those two guys, more than anybody else, created the ability for us to build these world-class information systems and processes. And they made me look really good in the process. And it was really unique the way they created the vision for where we could go, used me to sell it, used me to remove the obstacles, but they forced their teams or led their teams to work so cooperatively well together that they achieved something that was really, really remarkable. And it was so well done that then, at that time, our sales organization began to use the finance group as part of its sales efforts to say, here's what you can do using Microsoft technology. Do you see what our finance guys have done with, and gals have done with all this online technology? So that was 94 to 96. And towards the end of 96, the chief operating officer at the time was a guy named Bob Herbold. He and Ballmer approached me about moving into the CIO job, which is Chief Information Officer. And I didn't know what a CIO was. All I knew was the acronym that CIO also stands for career is over, because CIOs get fired pretty regularly. Right. And I didn't know what a PBX was or a router.
Yeah, you didn't have that background, so you
No.
walked into this group of people. Was there a little bit of a cynical look?
Oh,
like,
there was.
Who's this guy and why is he our leader?
There was. It was really interesting. You know, there was, and this group was probably 1,200 people worldwide. A large number of engineering people, a large number of support people, a large number of application developers. Oh yeah, the first meetings you'd go into and you could just see in these guys' eyes, and one of the things that I pride myself on is I read people well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I don't do well, but I can read people and size them up pretty quick. And these engineering folks are just looking at you like, you know, this guy, he has no chance of making it. He's going to be casualty number 3.
Right.
And that was a really hard job.
Huh.
It was a lot of waking up in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning, reading database magazines, reading telephony
Which
magazine.
puts you right back to sleep again, I imagine.
Yeah, or just, no, you just be so panicked that you were going to fail or not do well at this that, you know, I'd get up at 3 in the morning and be into work by 5:30 a.m.
What was the tact you took? Okay, you come in, I'm the leader.
Yeah.
These guys, I can tell, they don't think I got what it takes. What do you do to become their, I mean, you are the titled leader.
Yeah.
How do you become the leader?
Well, the first thing that I really had to do was I really had to learn who did what and what was who had the budget. And so one of the first things we did was we created a consolidated budget worldwide that the CIO was responsible for, because prior to that, each of these groups regionally around the world was responsible for their budget. So first thing was to get the purse strings to know who did what and who spent what money on what. So we did a really rigorous, myself and the IT controller with the management team, a very rigorous analysis of what do people spend their money on and what do we spend our time on. And it was the first time that it had kind of been a sort of an end-to-end business look at what is the business of this IT group. I think that for a number of the people in the group was illuminating that you could use an analytic approach and find out what are the priorities. Secondly, I spent a lot of time with one-on-one interviews with the management, and then a lot of interviews with skip levels, so talking to the people that worked for them.
So what was the goal? To a number of different goals, build relationship with them?
The first
understand?
was, the first goal was really to understand what do people do and what are the priorities of the group, because it wasn't clear what the priorities were. The view of the company was we're spending all this money on IT, the apps don't work very good, the network isn't very robust, it's an endless amount of money we're pouring into this thing without result. And so it was just a high level of dissatisfaction. So the first thing was for us as a management team to really know what do we spend our money on and what do we do as a priority for this company and for customers. So the analysis helped with that. The second was to address a real morale problem and a kind of a confidence problem the group had. And being in IT at Microsoft's fairly tough because you support a lot of technical people, many of whom are brilliant, few of whom really understand how enterprise IT actually works, but they think they know.
Yeah.
And then another morale issue at the time in 1996 was the IT group was required to use Microsoft technology, no matter whether it was ready to be used by a large enterprise or not. And at this time, Microsoft was 15,000 people. And a lot of the stuff wasn't ready for prime time that the IT group was required to use. So we had to address that morale problem. First, we had to know what we were doing, we had to know where we were spending money, and we had to have credibility with what we were doing financially. Secondly, then, was to address the morale problem, and there were two real problems. One was the IT group was being blamed for a lot of issues in the environment that were the problem of Microsoft's products. So we put together a really thorough review of the product problems, and we had that review with Bill Gates and product leaders. And instead of the guns being pointed at IT, the guns started to get pointed at the product people. That took a lot of the pressure off, and the IT people started to see that we add value in terms of the product development process. And we started a process we called eating our own dog food, which was how do we systematically enter this stuff into the IT environment, run it, provide feedback to the product groups, have them incorporate it and learn, and then improve what customers get. And then that's been something Microsoft has done ever since, and the guy that was my successor took to a whole different level than I ever did.
So it sounds like so much of what you were doing in leading and building an organization is problem solving, seeking to understand the issues.
And people. And the second part of the morale issue, aside from the product problems, was getting the right leaders in the right jobs. And in many IT organizations, people who are very technically sound and technical experts get promoted into management jobs when they're not really great people leaders, they're not great managers, and they may not even want to be managers. Well, when you have a large, complex organization, you need to have good leaders. So basically, in that job, similar to a couple other jobs, we had to get some people, sit down and say, you're out of position. And we brought a number of great business leaders, particularly from the finance group, into the IT group to complement the team and build out the management ranks.
So, kind of in closing here, I'm wondering if you could give some advice to the people who are watching, who are maybe just starting their career, maybe even 25, 26, 30 years old, and they're saying, I would really like to make a career in my corporation. What advice would you give to somebody who says, I want to increase and grow and go to the next level? What should they do to do that?
The first thing is do every job well, because the wall gets built a brick at a time on how you've done in each job. And you're going to have great managers, you're going to have poor managers. Do every job well, because there's this file or resume or brick that gets built about you, or this wall, brick by brick. So do each job well. Secondly, work really hard and learn as much as you can about the industry and about the business you're in. So you should be reading the third-party publications, you should be reading the Wall Street Journal. You have to be a sponge to learn and know so many things about your company because you've put the effort in. The third key thing I would say is you've got to be great at connecting with people. You'll find many people in your career in an organization that are competent at what they do, but they're not as good as connecting as others. The people that are competent and connect well are those that become the leaders. And finally, become a good communicator, both in writing and orally. And as you get into the executive ranks, that really separates the great leaders from the great managers, those that can really communicate. So I would say, Chris, those four things.
Amazing stuff. We didn't even get to hear about being CFO of a company or what you're doing now with Ignition Partners and investing in other upstarting companies and that type of thing. I really appreciate getting a chance to know you and meet you and you taking the time to be here and be with us.
Appreciate that, Chris. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Made for Success podcast. Get to know us at madeforsuccess.com/podcast. Meet the hosts of the Made for Success podcast and pick up a free copy of the Totally Motivated ebook by Chris Widener. We will see you next time on the Made for Success podcast.